basically my only job for this event is to welcome everyone here, get some housekeeping items out of the way, and then turn it over to our panel for the rest of the event. So as you can all tell, we're using a platform called AirMeet. For most of the people that join our events, it's the first time that they use the platform. So we're going to take a couple seconds here and just take a look around. You can see a couple of people have started using the live chat feature. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to type hello world in the chat feature so you can all see that. And then we're going to touch on a couple other features. So if everyone wants to go ahead and say hello in the chat, go ahead and do that. Make sure you know what you're doing. The second thing is at the bottom of your screen, you should see a number of buttons. If you click on the button with the emoji, you can react to what the panel is saying in real time. So I want to kind of test that. Click the emoji button and choose the emoji that best represents how you feel about all the ice and snow, assuming that you're maybe joining from Ohio. So go ahead and click that emoji. Let's see that fly across the screen, hopefully. I'm seeing a couple. About what I expected. Yep, a couple prayers in there. Okay. Looks like we are all getting the hang of it. Fantastic. Okay. A couple light bulbs in there. I like it. All right. So, like I said, my job here is basically just to welcome us all to the event. Our Entrepreneurial Journey Speaker Series event, we try and touch on a number of different topics throughout the year. This event is Entrepreneurship in Recovery. We've got a great panel here, and I want to pass it over to them as quickly as possible, so I'll keep this brief. This event is about building bridges. That's what we're trying to do here. Nothing more, nothing less. And I feel like I am really excited to hear what they have to say. We are looking forward to a conversation that explores a lot of different topics. Feel free to, if you've got a thought as the panel is talking, type it in the chat. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the question tab or on the right-hand side there. And then when we get to the Q&A portion of the event, that is where we will look for questions. So if you have a question, put it there. If you've got a comment, throw it in the chat. Let's see here. A couple other housekeeping items. I want to thank all of the organizations that brought table reps. We found that when we get to kind of to start the event off and at the end of the event, it really helps to have people at each table that feel comfortable welcoming everyone and making everyone feel like it is a welcoming event. So those organizations are the Counseling Center, Brightview, Port 45, River Valley Organizing, Empower Treatment, and Ascend Counseling. Thank you all for joining us today. And then the last item here, if you look again on the right-hand side and you see the tab that says Attendees, if you click on that, you should be able to find Derek Parker. Derek Parker is our program coordinator for some of our other entrepreneurship events. And if you are a student with Shawnee State University and you're getting extra credit from a faculty member, go ahead and send him a message about the faculty member that's giving you extra credit, likely Jessica Priode or Michael Stone. That is all that I've got, so I am going to take myself off the stage here and kick it over to Josh Lawson. Josh is the program coordinator at the Hub for the recovery community. I hope that a lot of you here know him or recognize him, and please feel free to reach out to him after the event if you'd like, or likely many of our panelists as well. So with that, Josh, I'm passing it over to you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, David. I want to say a quick thank you to all of you out there in the audience for joining us, and also a quick thank you to our esteemed panel here tonight. I don't know all of our panelists personally. I know a few of them personally, but what I know of all of them and their work as it relates to recovery, harm reduction, mental health, I have a great deal of respect for them and for what they do. So we're here tonight to hear from them about their journey as social entrepreneurs and how that intersects with their personal experience of being in recovery from substance use disorder, drug addiction, or as Taryn has said, all the things. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I'm going to give them a minute, some space here in just a minute to introduce themselves. And then we're going to move into some prepared questions that I have just to kick off this conversation. As David said, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. We're going to take about an hour to talk amongst ourselves here. I'm just here to help facilitate the conversation. They're going to take the conversation and I'm just going to follow their lead. So you all on the panel, thank you so much for making time for us tonight. The only thing that I ask is be mindful of the fact that we've got an hour to talk. We've got a lot to go over. There's 5 of you here, and I want to hear as much as we possibly can from all 5 of you. So when you comment, when you respond, let's do our best to say everything you need to say. Don't hold anything back. But if you can, keep your comments to 3-4 minutes at the most so that we can hear from everybody here as much as we possibly can, okay? So with that said, let's start maybe with Jesse. And then from there, each of you can take it from there. Let's take a couple minutes. Jesse, you start us off. Just tell us who you are, why you're here, and what's something you want the audience to know about you tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. It's an honor to be here. This is a new platform for me, so AirMeet is definitely really cool. I'm really grateful for this, that this exists, that we can connect virtually despite what's happening. So my name is Jesse Harless. I'm the founder of Entrepreneurs in Recovery. I'm actually an author of a new book that's coming out on Monday about recovery called If Not You, Then Who? And so I'm just really excited to be here. I only known a few of you for a few minutes or a few days, but I'm really grateful. And I have a huge respect for what's happening in Ohio with the recovery movement. Just love what you guys are doing. I love that you actually are hosting this event. And so, yeah, just really grateful to be here.
Taryn, how about you next?
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Really, really honored to be here. So thank you for having me. And thank you to Josh and David and everyone at the team for all of the work that you're doing for the recovery community. It's really inspiring to see. So I'm Taryn Strong, and I am the founder of the She Recovers Foundation, and I am a Canadian. I'm the only Canadian here. I was checking out the attendee list, and so I'm your honorary Canadian tonight. And we were joking a few days ago that I'm bringing in the girl power to this panel. So really excited to do that. Always excited to do that. And She Recovers Foundation, it's something that I founded with my mother. My mother and I were both in recovery from lots of things. One of those things, of course, being substance use disorder and trauma, etc. And we really believe that, like Josh had mentioned, we're all in recovery from something. So what makes our foundation unique is that we really invite women recovering from all the things together, and we encourage them all to recover in their own ways. We really celebrate different patchways and patchworks of recovery, which I'm sure I'll talk more about in the panel. But thank you so much for having me.
All right, Eric, how about you?
Hi, my name is Eric Zimmer, and I am the founder of The One You Feed. We are a couple different things. Podcasting. We have a podcast called The One You Feed. We have behavioral coaching services. We have group programs. We have a program called Spiritual Habits. And basically, we are all about practical wisdom that people can use in their day-to-day lives. I'm in recovery. Myself, I was... originally got sober at the age of 24, had about 8 years sober, went out, drank again, and have been back about 14 years. I celebrated 14 years just a couple of days ago. And I've been in entrepreneurship most of my adult life also. So I'm really happy to be here. It's the second time that I've been able to be involved with the Innovation Hub here and talk. So I'm happy to be back again. Just wish it was in person.
Excellent. John, how about you?
Hey guys, it's definitely an honor to be here tonight. My name is John Evans. I'm the founder of an outreach sober support group called Raw Addiction Through the Eyes of Recovery. I also have a loved one side, which is called Raw Addiction Through the Eyes of a Loved One. And what we promote is change. What we try to do is get people into detox, recovery, try to get them out of the way that they're in and try to get them into a new way. We're in the process now of opening up our first house. It will be a center of resources right here in Portsmouth, and it's to help with money management classes, job placement, pretty much anything that we can do that's positive. And I think this right here is huge because it definitely is a part of what we're trying to establish right here in Portsmouth, Ohio. Thank you, guys.
Take it, Jake.
Had to figure out how to unmute my mic. Hey guys, I'm Jake Bradshaw. I am the Director of Business Development for a nationwide treatment facility called Seacrest Recovery Center. I am also the founder of a blog called Humans of Addiction, co-founder of a blog called The Addict's Diary, with a combined reach of about 50 million people per month. Do a lot of work also with traditional media, the New York Times being one of those media outlets, with working on, kind of reshaping the narrative surrounding specifically the opioid epidemic in Ohio, but also nationwide. And it is good to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
All right, excellent. Thank you all. So like I said, we've got a few prepared questions just to kick us off here for our conversation. And I prepared some of these myself, and I crowdsourced some of them from people who were interested in this event beforehand. So let's start with maybe the topic of stigma. I've got a question here that came originally from one of our local treatment providers. It said this, and anybody feel free to take this question and run with it, and we'll just talk around this to begin. So notoriously, people with addiction issues are viewed in society as being lazy. What is your response to this common view?
I'll jump in. My first response is that just really shows us how much work that we have to do. And, we've come so far in the recovery world of showing people what recovery looks like and that recovery is possible. Because there still is so much stigma that exists, it's just a reminder that we need to keep going and that we need to keep celebrating recovery and showing the world what recovery looks like and recovering out loud whenever we can.
I'll hop in on that. Thanks, Taryn. I think that's good. I got sober the first time from heroin addiction in 1994. So it was a long time ago. So that idea about how far we've come, I think, is really, really true, right? It's a different thing today. It feels like to me to say that you're in recovery than it did 25 years ago. So I think the first thing I would say about stigma is that I don't think we should assume there is stigma. I'm not saying there's not, but if we live out of a place assuming that there's a stigma, we're going to limit what we say, what we do, and how we express ourselves. And out of 25 years largely in recovery, the number of times that I feel like something bad has happened by me sharing my recovery, I could count on a couple of fingers. The number of times something positive has come out of me sharing my recovery is I'd need all of our fingers, right? So I just would say, let's be careful not to assume that there is always stigma. Sure, sometimes there is, but I think a lot of times there's not.
I'll jump in. I agree with the whole recovery out loud. We do a Saturday Night Live every Saturday night at 9 o'clock. We've been doing it for 3 years now. We haven't missed a Saturday yet. And I believe that the more we come together and the more we put it out here on the streets, the better we become. The more the stigma is fought, or like he said, just kind of not letting it be a label, but more of an educational standpoint and proving that we can come together and we can be as one, whether it's not just us in the recovery field, but people that hold a position all over the world, no matter if it's government, the judges, the lawyers, doctors, because I believe that, it's not prejudice. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who you are. So I think Recovery Out Loud is where it's at.
I could just add to I love what Eric said, because where we put our attention is where we put our energy. So we're putting our attention on stigma. That's where our energy is going. So having I think one of the biggest things too with stigma is honoring every path to recovery. We have some of the most stigma comes inside of the recovery community because of people judging people's recovery, which is complete fear and perception. So I really just thinking honoring all of the paths to recovery, and I mean all of them, is the way that we can start to change it with inside the community of recovery, so that we can help to influence outside the community of recovery. So I think that's where we can start.
Wow, once again, forgot how to unmute my mic. Let's see how many times I can do that. And another thing that I should have touched on in my intro, but I didn't. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, right? So I've lived on both sides of that. And that statement that people in active addiction or people in recovery are lazy. I mean, listen, there's a lot of descriptive words you could have used about me when I was in active addiction, and lazy was certainly not one of them then either. It actually takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to maintain any kind of substance use disorder issue, alcoholism, and that's the same with a lot of people who I got sober with, a lot of people that I know in recovery. And so what ends up happening, at least with a lot of my colleagues and friends, is they're able to kind of use that same hustle mentality towards something positive, right? And so I think, to answer the question, which I'm sure I'm going to harp on this a lot tonight, the thing that kind of shifts that stigma, or whatever you want to call it, is just getting some of these stories out continuously, right? Of people who were not only in active addiction, right? And not only did they get sober, but now this is what they're doing now. Right. And panelists set aside, I mean, clearly everyone on this panel kind of fits in there, but you don't have to look far. Even a small town like Portsmouth, Ohio, everywhere you look, at every treatment center, a lot of different small businesses have someone towards the top of the food chain who is a person in recovery, who is working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week tirelessly to shape something, that they believe in. So I think getting those stories out is where it starts.
That's awesome. Unless anybody has anything else to add to that train of thought, I had another question here that I think that kind of segues rather nicely with, which is maybe the relationship between the work that you all do with your experience, both past and present, of being in recovery. I have a question here that said, maybe you could speak around, what do you see was the main factor or factors that drove your substance use disorder in the past? And now in recovery, as a social entrepreneur, how have you harnessed that same drive and channeled it towards the things that you're involved in now? That's that same energy, that same hustle that you're talking about there, Jake. How has that translated from before, when you were in active addiction, to now with the various things that you're involved in?
I'll go ahead and I'll jump in first then. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but for me, and it took a while for me to realize this, but I always looked at my substance use disorder issues like that was the problem, right? That if I could just stop getting high, or if I could just stop drinking, then the problem would be solved, right? And what it took me a long time to realize was it wasn't my problem. It was my solution. And it was a pretty good solution until it wasn't, right? So my problems were, they ran a lot deeper than that, right? And so the main one is, I was full of fear. And then I had these weird juxtaposition, irrational fears. I was terrified of failure, but I was also terrified of success, right? And when you have fears on both ends of the spectrum, there's nowhere you can go but to self-medicate, right? So when I got sober, not only when I got sober, when I started addressing those issues, right? Then I was able to, kind of step out of that fear and like really take a chance. And what really changed it for me is perspective, right? A lot of times along the way, I did fail. I fell on my face, whether that was in recovery or whether that was in business. And in that moment, it seemed like it was like earth shattering. Like, this is the worst thing that could have happened. But as I stayed sober a little longer and I'm able to look back at it in retrospect, I'm able to see that's the best thing that could have happened, right? That failure, I learned this from it. I got this experience and now I'm doing this, right? And that was all just a direct result of what I've done in my journey of recovery.
I'll jump in. With me, it was more, I was sitting in a prison cell, and actually, whenever I started off, they gave me an 8-year bit to do. And at first, it was like, I played that poor, pitiful me role. And then one day it just kind of clicked, I guess. And it was like, here you are in here playing poor, pitiful me while your kids are out there fending for themselves and trying to find direction and understanding from the next man or from, whoever, the neighbor, whoever it may be. And I kind of learned to rechannel the energy that I put into my addiction. But, that whole, as soon as your feet hit the floor in the morning, the first thought on your mind, is to get high. And when your feet leave the floor at night, the last thought of the night, if you even go to sleep, is to get high. So I learned to rechannel that energy that I was out there, because you could have told me anything, like that there was no dope right here in Portsmouth, that I would have to travel to Tennessee or Columbus, and I'd have figured out a way. If I didn't have a car, I'd have took a bike. If I didn't have a bike, I'd have hitchhiked. So I learned to rechannel that energy, that negative energy, into a positive, and from there, my thing that I said within was, the world is a big dinner plate, and I'm hungry, and I'm going to try to save anybody and everybody I can along the way. I'm never going to forget where I.
I can just add that for me, where it started, it was trauma. And I think for a lot of people, it's unrecognized trauma where this begins. And I think when I look back now, because I celebrated 15 years of recovery in December, and looking back and seeing throughout my life, like, what are these things that are blocking me? A lot of it goes back to childhood, and seeing these times when there was abandonment and trauma. And that really sparked things that played out later on when I started to use drugs and alcohol. I wanted to get outside myself. My first drug was fantasy. It was being on the computer. It was getting outside of myself. And then eventually I turned to drugs and alcohol. And so, but if you look back, there's a lot of trauma that informed a lot of my decisions. So I think really getting clear on some of that trauma, maybe working with a professional or someone to get really clear on sharing that trauma is where it originated. And today, just like John was saying, directing my energy into entrepreneurship, or putting it into, like when I was going back to school, it was putting it into school and chasing that just as hard as I chased my addiction. I should have 5 PhDs if I was going to chase my addiction as hard as I chase entrepreneurship. I should have a $100 million business, right? Because that's how hard I went at my addiction. It was this roaring lion I couldn't put to sleep. And so if I could just chase my life, my purpose, my passions in the same way, even just a little bit of that, even 10% of that, I'm going to be successful. And that's the same thing with anyone else who's on this or listening to this. We use that resilience that we did to overcome our traumas and adversities and hardships right into living our purpose, or right into working for someone else and helping to expand their business, which can be part of your purpose. So for us, it's just become, as entrepreneurs, we're putting our passion, our drive, and a little bit of is addiction too, right? You can have addiction inside of entrepreneurs to get addicted to the hustle. So it's really self-regulation tools. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, and self-care that kind of balances that out.
Yeah, I love everybody's responses, and I love this question. So thank you for it. I can think of, it's really bringing up a lot in a really beautiful way, so I'll have to journal on it later. But the ones that are really coming through strongest right now for me are, Jake, what you were saying about how, for me, my substances and my addiction, that's what I was using to cope with what Jesse was talking about, was the trauma. You know, I was a 16-year-old who was addicted to cocaine and meth, and I left home to live with my crack dealing boyfriend. And at that time, that's what I was doing to avoid dealing with the childhood trauma. And the childhood trauma led me to these beliefs of not being worthy. I really did not think that, I believed that I was just this worthless human, and that I really also had this story that I didn't belong. And I also fell into this narrative that I was told because my parents were addicted, I was just going to be an addict, and that was just the future for me. And when I was able to find recovery, thank goodness, and I was able to break through those old narratives and see that they actually weren't true, and remember and realize, because of my community and all the work that I did, that I actually am worthy, and that it's okay not to belong. That's really been the drive for me in the work that I do, is I want to make sure that, you know, for me, because I deal with women in my work, I want to make sure that every single woman that I possibly can reach knows that recovery is possible and that she's worth it. And the belonging piece for me is, you know, it's okay to not belong, because we are the people as entrepreneurs who are carving new ways and creating new communities that don't exist because maybe we don't feel like we belong in those worlds, and that's okay. I see it as a beautiful thing now. I see it as turning it into unique offerings. So thanks for this question, and I definitely have more to unpack with it.
Thanks, Taryn, and everyone. I agree with a lot of what's been said. When I think back to what drove my substance abuse, I think part of what makes addiction such a challenging thing is it's a constellation of causes that are almost impossible to tweeze apart completely. We know some of the big ones. Trauma is a big one. We know lots of them. So I just know for myself, by the time I was a 9-year-old, I was a complete kleptomaniac, so I was always, I think, trying to find ways to feel connected to life. And stealing made me feel connected to life. Drugs and alcohol made me feel connected to life. There's a great scene from an old movie called Days of Wine and Roses, and the husband's talking to the wife, and she's an alcoholic. They're both alcoholics, and she says that, when I'm sober, it's like everything is gray, but when I drink, it's like the lights all get flipped on, right? And so that described my relationship to my addictions. It was like the lights got flipped on. It was like I felt connected to life. And that's what I found about entrepreneurship, is that it has an energy to it. It has an excitement to it. It has it turns the lights on for me. And so I found that it's it's been a really important part for me of recovery. Or it doesn't have to be entrepreneurship. I think it might have been Jake who said that, but whatever it is we find that can connect us back to the world is what's really important. I just happen to have found that entrepreneurship in a few different forms over the years has been one of those big things for me that connects me back to the world.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So I've heard from a few of you so far in this conversation, this idea of recovery out loud. So, it's something I'm constantly trying to understand, just as kind of an outsider, kind of as an ally to people in recovery, not having that experience myself. It seems like I've noticed a trend. Recovery once was all about anonymity, with the AA and the NA tradition. But now there are more and more folks like yourself who are going public, so to speak. Recovering out loud, being on platforms like this and talking about your experience. I had a question from another contributor related to this that I want to offer to you all now. She said a recovering pastor that she follows said that she has learned how to preach from her scars, not from her wounds. So the question is, how do you, in your work, judge for yourself what parts of your journey, your past, to bring to your work now? with clients, with people that you work with, whatever it might be. Have there been lessons you've learned in this regard that you think others could benefit from? How vulnerable, I guess the essence of that question is, how vulnerable do you be with your past, with your history of active addiction and substance use? How much of that do you bring to your work currently as entrepreneurs in whatever it is that you do?
I'll share, because I think it's all of it. I mean, I share all of it. I mean, it's my story involves my messiness, my addictions, my successes, my traumas, everything. And if I can share that with the world, then people can say, wow, I don't relate to that, but I relate to the feelings, or I relate to something. So the more I can share, whether it's a trauma or whether it's a success or failure, what I found is those quieter voices start to come out. Those quieter voices that are on the brink of ending it. They're on the depths of their addiction. When I share some of the weird stuff that I did, and it's all there, I have shared all of it. You know, I'll get a voice that private messages me or reaches out and says, thank you so much for sharing that strange aspect of yourself that you shared. So I really believe personally, it's share it all, put it all on the table. And I appreciate the fellowships and the anonymity in the fellowships, but we have to change something right now. It has to be radical. So we need to get the voices out of the millions of people living in recovery, because you're not violating any traditions. You're talking about your recovery. So we really need more of that, because what we're doing now is not working. Some of it is, but for the majority of it, it's not. So, you know, being bold, sharing your story. And I know this panel is all very open about their story. I think it could be very, very useful.
With me, the whole point of starting Raw Addiction was to tell. Actually, at first I didn't want on the camera. I wanted behind the camera. I wanted to let other people tell their stories. But it was like someone in my ear kept saying, "How are you going to tell your story behind the camera? How are you? What if your story is the one story that somebody needs to hear?" So whenever we do our Saturday Night Lives, I always say that, whether you're 1 day clean or 100 days clean, we're all just one bad decision away from, where we were. And I think that every story has meaning. I think that if someone were to get up on or watch our live, and they could take bits and pieces from each story they hear, you just never know whose life you could completely turn around. So that's why I feel like, the whole Recovery Out Loud is, every story matters, whether it's on the other side of addiction or addiction. And myself, I believe that we all recover differently. And I also believe that, well, I'm on both sides. I'm a loved one of an addict now, and I was an addict for 20 years. So coming up on 11 years clean. So I've seen a little bit of both sides.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I love the idea of how she talked about scars, sharing from her scars instead of her wounds, because I do believe that it is important for me, just speaking for myself, that I do allow myself some time to process and heal from things before I start to share them. So I totally agree with Josh and Jesse so far, where I share everything. I'm an open book. I've known that the things that I have been terrified to share with my community seem to have been some of the most meaningful things that I have shared. It's, that Me Too situation where women in my community, we all think, oh gosh, I'm the only person experiencing this or thinks this, who has gone through this. So it's so empowering when you can hear stories. But one teacher of mine did share once, don't share your shit when you're in your shit. Like, let yourself distance from yours a little bit. So that's kind of, I think, ties into the scars to wound. And in our community, we have 10 intentions and guiding principles. And one of them is, when we're ready, we recover out loud so that other women can join our community. And what we mean when we say recover out loud is some of us, we're going to dedicate our lives to recovery, and we're going to have Instagram pages and Facebook pages and entire businesses that revolve around recovery. But for some people, recovering out loud is simply, let's say we weren't in a pandemic and we were on an airplane, and maybe you're sitting on an airplane and the person next to you is sharing how their child is addicted or their loved one is addicted. Then you recovering out loud could say, oh, I have some experience with that myself. That can be recovering out loud. It doesn't have to be shouting from the rooftops all of your traumas and all of your wounds, unless you want it to be. But recovering out loud can simply just be listening and saying, I totally get it. I've been there too.
I guess I'll go. Yeah, I think a lot of things, I agree with a lot of what's been said here. I actually heard this quote. I was talking with somebody earlier today, and they said this, they were talking about something. They said, they said radical authenticity is not the same thing as radical transparency. And I thought that was an interesting idea, that like I can be authentic without sharing every single element of every single part of my life all the time. Now, I think it's also helpful to think about where am I sharing from and for what reason? So as a recovering addict, I think it's very important that I share from my vulnerability, from my wounds, when I'm in my wounds, in order to get help. Right? I need to do that. That's part of my recovery. And as somebody who also guides other people at certain points, I feel like I want to share from a place of to take a 12-step phrase, my experience, strength, and hope. Right? I want to be able, if I'm coming to people with something, I want it to have some experience. I want there to be some strength, and I want there to be some hope. So I think when I'm sharing from one place, I want to share more from my scars and my wounds. And I also know that I have to share from my wounds as a recovering person to get the help that I need. What I did for years in recovery was I would love to come. I would just do all the struggling on my own. Then I'd come to you and I'd say, look how well I applied the principles of recovery to this problem I had. Because I was perfectly happy to talk about what hurt me when it hurt me a week ago. But it was a lot harder for me to talk about what hurt me when it was actually hurting me. And that was an important part of recovery for me, was to learn to do that, to share what's hurting me while it's hurting me. And again, not with everybody, not all the time, but in the right places. So for me, part of it is what am I doing? What's the relationship I'm in? Who am I sharing with, and why am I doing it? And now over to Jake.
Yeah, and I'm gonna. I mean, I agree with everything, but just to be a little different, I'm gonna take the other end of the spectrum, right? Because I think like a lot of business, it's all about knowing your audience, right? And so, for example, like there's certain platforms that I have that revolve around addiction and recovery, struggle and triumph. And those are platforms where I'm able to be, very forthcoming and transparent about any struggles that I've had, right? And that's kind of the purpose of them. But then there are also situations in business, and since this is what we're talking about, where like if I'm in a boardroom with a venture capitalist firm, it might not be the time and place to talk about, shooting up behind a dumpster, right? And it's, and I'm taking it to extremes there, but I have friends like that. I have friends that are, they're like, hey, I'm nice to meet you. I'm Joe. I'm a heroin addict. And then the person they're talking to is like, sir, this is a Wendy's. Like, do you want to order? Like, why are you telling me that? Right. And so like, it's all about kind of like knowing who you're talking to and knowing when to bring that up. But the constant for me is like the principles of recovery, letting those shine through, right? Even in that boardroom, even at Wendy's, right? The principles that got you to where you're able to be in a boardroom or afford Wendy's. I don't know why. I'm just committed to that Wendy's reference now, so I have to keep going back to it. But the principles that put us in a position to be able to be in those places, I try to let those shine through in everything I do. Experience with drugs, some avenues, I'm an open book. Sometimes I won't mention it, and sometimes it's nobody's business,
I try and limit my discussion to shooting up at the board table, not behind the dumpster. I think that really makes it go over better. Jake, you might try that next time.
No, that's great. That's a good point, Jake. I appreciate you saying that. So what do you say to people, for instance, in the Southern Ohio area here who are listening to this, who the recovery community has taken on kind of a life of its own here, which I think is fantastic. But what do you say to those individuals who maybe they're in recovery now, but working in the treatment industry perhaps is not for them. They have other dreams, they have other ideas, that they have things they want to do that include but go beyond their identity as just a person in recovery. What do you say to that kind of person?
And this has been not only my direct experience, but I've been around recovery for a long time, and I have a lot of friends that are very successful in business, and they're in recovery. And I'm not just talking about my friends that own treatment centers or have wildly successful media things that have to do with recovery. I mean, I have friends that came into recovery with nothing, like a lot of us do, and maybe they own different kind of businesses that have nothing to do with recovery, right? Whatever. They've opened a business that sells chemicals, or, they opened a private practice, right? And a lot of those people, the way that they did that was exactly what I'm talking about, knowing your audience, right? You'll be really surprised when you get into the circles of recovery, how many people there are in there that are very plugged in, right? There are very successful people in recovery. And more importantly, they want you to be successful. So the more that you branch out in recovery and have these conversations with other people that are in recovery, you'd be very shocked who you can meet. I know people that have had entire business ventures that are financed because they met somebody, whether it was, in a meeting or just in an outside area where they were talking about recovery. And just so happens, this person runs a hedge fund and their nephew was an addict and is struggling, right? So it's just about knowing who your audience is, and networking. And it's not about what you know, it's about who you know.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit to that, because when I left my job in 2017 to become an entrepreneur in recovery, I happened to call my business Entrepreneurs in Recovery, but I was being mentored. I sought out people who were running really successful businesses that had nothing to do with recovery. They were running masterminds that cost $25,000 a year, and they were attracting entrepreneurs from all over the world. And these are people that were entrepreneurs in recovery. They just weren't talking about the recovery every day, right? Because recovery gives us a chance to become the best version of ourselves. We're not better than anyone. We're not lower than anyone. We just have a more resilience, maybe. I don't know. Or just So I think that, like Jake was saying, use your intuition, like be smart. You don't have to tell every person you meet you're in recovery. I worked at Verizon for 14 years and didn't tell anyone I was in recovery. And the only reason I didn't is because it wasn't the place. But when someone came to me and said, I'm suicidal, I need help, I shared. So just use your discernment. And that was really well said, Jake. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with what has just been said. I think, I had a 20-year career in the software industry and in the solar industry before I do the one you feed in what I do. And, early on in recovery, I was a little bit like Jake. I'd roll up to anybody who showed up, and the first thing out of my mouth was like, I'm a recovering heroin addict, like everybody, and at work too, in a professional career. But a few years into that, I started to kind of go, well, maybe not everybody really needs to hear that all the time. So it really became, I think some of it too is when you're first in recovery. When I was first in recovery, I didn't have a whole lot else to talk about. There wasn't much to my life that didn't involve drugs or recovery. That was my life. But as my life went on, and I had more time in recovery and time working a career, I could talk to normal people about normal things. I could talk about, I didn't have to, wasn't the only thing there. So I became more judicious over the years in my professional career about what I became more judicious about what I would share with people when. and it just, I think I was probably somewhere between telling everybody all the time and telling no one. I was somewhere in the middle. And is it felt appropriate? Or, if somebody asked me to happy hour for like the 15th time, and I finally was like, I really like this guy. We're good. We're really good friends at work. He probably thinks I hate him. Maybe I'll tell him. Maybe I need to tell him I'm not going to happy hour. Here's why. It's not because you're a jerk. It's because, so it just kind of, depended. I just over time. And, so I think that was part of it for me was the more I had time in the world, the less of my life was defined only by substance abuse and recovery. So there was more of me that I could share.
I believe there's definitely a place and time sometimes. Real estate is something that I'm passionate about. It's not recovery driven, but at the same time, whenever I remodel a home or something, it kind of coincides with my recovery because I feel like these houses that are broken, like I felt it was, I was broken, and it was kind of like just bringing them back to life. And so I definitely understand what all you guys are saying, but I think that, yeah, there's definitely a time and place for your recovery.
So let's go to this question then. I'm assuming that in your all's work, and the various things that you do, you face a lot of stress, right? We all face stress. And often I think, people, I guess, turn to substance use as a way of coping with stress. It's kind of a maladaptive coping mechanism. So here's a question I received from someone. As an entrepreneur now, this was from her perspective. She said, as an entrepreneur with no known chemical addiction to her besides caffeine, she said, I'm often tempted to use unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with my stress. One of those being I tend to overwork. What are some positive ways that now in recovery you cope with the stress of being an entrepreneur?
I'll jump in first. It's kind of twofold, I guess, for me. One, it's, like a lot of things in my life, it's about perspective. And being sober for a little while, this is one thing that I've gotten really good at. I'm able to laugh at myself, right? So I'll get in those situations where, something's going on in business or whatever in life where I'm super busy and I start to get stressed out, and that starts to manifest itself in whatever actions or ways. And I'm able to just sit down and think about it and think where I was before all this, right? And how stressful that was, and how stressful being homeless is, and all of these other situations that I've been in. And it kind of lightens it a little bit. But really what does it for me is the same thing that happens any other time with any other situation where I'm focused on self, right? Because if I'm getting stressed out, it's about me. It's poor me. There's not enough time in the day. I've got too much going on. I've got too much going on my plate. And the only thing that I've found to get out of self is altruism. That's the only thing that works for me, is helping other people, right? And so what I try to do is I try to incorporate that in to different businesses that I'm involved in that kind of satisfy that altruism factor. And if it gets to the point where I'm too stressed out, I just take a step back. I take a step back and I focus on helping someone else. And that's typically what helps me get out of self and deal with stress.
Yeah, I love the question. And, I like what Jake said too, and then I'll come back to it, because when I was first getting into recovery, I was facing federal felonies, 7 years in federal prison. And one of the things what happened is the first year I went back to school, I went to a community college, and I remember getting a C on a paper and flipping out. My whole world went upside down. And I was like, wait a minute, a couple months ago, I was literally in Florida near death. And now it puts things in perspective, in recovery with things that happen to us. But I also want to say, as far as stress goes, like, to me, self-care and recovery is inseparable. Like, if you're not putting self-care first in recovery, you're going to fall back into cross addictions. You're going to find other addictions, sex addiction, caffeine addiction. No offense to that, people who are addicted to caffeine, but other addictions that can be harmful for your adrenal glands, can be harmful for your body. So I think learning to self-regulate, and for me, it starts with mindfulness. It starts with like a heart-centered breathing and taking care of. The way I regulate stress is one, movement. I got to move, whether that's yoga, whether that's stretching, whether that's a 10-minute walk. For me, it could be cold showers. That might sound scary, but that's one of the things I do. But definitely mindfulness and heart-centered breathing is like probably the biggest thing from self-regulation for stress for me today.
Taryn, not to put you on the spot, but I know you're a trauma-informed yoga instructor too. I'd love to hear a little bit about that in your
Yeah. Oh gosh, I could talk about this all night, but I won't take up too much time, of course. But yeah, this has been a journey for me, and it's something that I'm constantly refining. So I'm also an aromatherapist, and I'm a herbalist, and I'm a trauma-informed yoga instructor. So for me, I have a lot of allies that I lean to. So today, for example, I was a little bit nervous about this panel. So I've got my lavender essential oil, I've got my holy basil tea, just to kind of help with the stress. Was doing some yoga before this. And what I've noticed for me over the years of being in recovery is when I first entered recovery, I was, and this might sound strange, but I was actually a little too disciplined and a little bit too rigid. I had like these long lists of daily self-care things that I had to do because I was so terrified if I wouldn't do them, I was going to relapse, right? But I was actually putting a lot of more stress on myself, and kind of really applying my perfectionist attitude toward my self-care rituals. So self-care didn't actually really feel like self-care. So I would say just in the past year, I've been practicing really softening into my self-care. I have like a menu of things that I know nourish me and that I know just fill me up and really help me to find my homeostasis and to ground me. So I have this menu, and every day I'll kind of check in and be like, okay, what do I need today? And that varies from day to day. And it's also been a really long journey that I'm still working on, of not being hard on myself and really allowing myself permission that some days it's just rest. It's actually, I'm doing nothing at all. Some days for me, self-care is Netflix. And other days, self-care for me is, an hour of yoga and Pilates and this and then that and that. But it changes every day, and just really allowing myself that ease and that permission. And that's what I'll say about that right now.
I could elaborate on what Taryn said there for hours also, because a big part of my work with people is what are the things in their life, what are the practices in their life that support them, help them, what things matter. And I think what you're speaking to there is I often say to people, we're not looking for rigidity in your practices, but we are looking for consistency. And so find that balance. But I'm going to pivot a slightly different direction to talk about stress, because this has been on my mind a lot. It's come up with a bunch of clients lately. And one definition of stress I've always liked is a perceived inability to cope or to handle what's happening. And the key word in there is perceived. The minute that I perceive I can handle what's happening, it's not stressful in the same way. So for me, one of the biggest ways to reduce stress is just to say, I can do this. I have done this. I've done this hundreds of times. I'll start getting stressed about how much I have to get done in a day. And I'll be like, that's happened how many times? 3,000 times in the last 25 years that I've started to get stressed because I had too much to do. And you know what? Here I am. It's always worked out. I've always figured it out. So for me, a big part of stress is just to remember that I can handle what's happening, and remind myself of that fact. That for me helps immediately bring down stress. And then all the other stuff that we do, for me, if I had one intervention for every aspect of life, physical, emotional, mental recovery, it would probably be exercise. That would be the one that for me does the most to make me feel better kind of across the board. So yeah, that's that.
For me, it's self-assessments. I do, whenever I get up in the mornings, it's about, I don't do it every day, but I try to do it at least once a week and just try to, remember where I've been, where I'm at, and where I want to be in life. And that itself, I feel, holds me accountable. And then giving back is something that I'm very passionate about. It keeps me grounded, I believe. And then, whenever I'm overly stressed, I go back to what got me in my recovery in the first place, my kids. My kids are my biggest critics. I definitely don't have to have anybody else tell me I'm doing something wrong. My kids are the first ones to tell me. I got 4 teenagers, and then, my 1-year-old, she definitely is right at my pants leg every day. So, my kids keep me grounded.
That's good. I like that, John. So we got about maybe 10 minutes here before we take a few questions from the audience. And so I just want to remind everybody out there that's still listening, if you have questions, share them in the questions comment, and you're able to upvote any of the questions that you see there so that Derek can choose the ones to bring on stage here once we're finished with the panel discussion. Maybe for our last few minutes here before we move into that phase of this conversation, we'll kind of shift back to the entrepreneurship aspect. I've got a question here about innovation. As I understand entrepreneurship, it includes, people who want to start their own business, but I think it's broader than that. I think the mindset of an entrepreneur is somebody who sees opportunities and problems, and attempts to solve those in their community. That may or may not include starting a business. So the question is this: what innovations are you seeing currently, either in your industry that you're involved in or in the recovery field in general over the past few years that excites you?
I'll speak to that. So much, but for me, what's really exciting me these days, being a trauma-informed yoga instructor, is the focus that we have on, like Eric talked about, the importance of remembering our body. So for so long, like when I was 16 and I entered recovery the first time, all that we really knew back then were, let's get Taryn into therapy and into some 12-step programs, which were great. And of course, I was able to find recovery that way. But what I was always wondering about was, well, what about my body? And then I just, found yoga, and how I felt after an hour of yoga was very different than how I felt after a meeting or after therapy, for example. So what I've seen over the last few years is a lot of research and studies supporting the importance of having a holistic approach to recovery, one where we're actually addressing the body, the mind, and the spirit. I'm seeing lots of innovations in the research and the focus that we're putting on about, trauma. And like Dr. Gabor Mate talks about, how let's really shift our thinking of why the addiction, but why the pain, or the trauma-informed approach of, instead of asking what's wrong with this person, focusing on what happened to this person. And a lot of the neuroscience too, and the fact that our brains are plastic and neuroplasticity is super innovative and really exciting. So I'm currently geeking out on a lot of that stuff, and I'm loving seeing those conversations in the recovery world. The people that I run with anyways.
Yeah, I can share too. And I was going to say something different until Taryn said what she said. I really love the starting to pay attention to the body in a holistic approach, even with the foods that we're consuming or what we're drinking. I mean, I can tell you what I put into my body has a direct effect on my mood, has a direct effect on my productivity, and direct effect on my vibration. So I just really paying attention. In early recovery, I didn't pay attention to that at all. Smoking, caffeine, pizzas, everything, just consuming everything to feel better in the moment. But in time and recovery, I started paying more attention to the body, like you said, Taryn. But I want to say the most innovative thing that I'm seeing that's happened in the last couple of years, which completely changed my life and helped me to become an entrepreneur in recovery, is coaching. So having a life coach or recovery coach, I see this industry is really getting big, and I'm really excited to see that. I actually wish it was moving even faster because we're in a crisis right now with the pandemic, but I'm really hoping to see insurance companies come in and say, hey, recovery coaching is it. Let's give money to treatment centers. Let's give money to states and federal governments for recovery coaching. This is the next wave I can see of innovation. It's going to really be a game changer for people. And coaching changed my life in 2015. That's how I had this idea of someone being almost a cheerleader for me, saying, yes, Jess, I believe in your dreams. Because sometimes you share your dreams with people and they shatter your dreams. So you got to find people who you can share your dreams with that won't crush them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jesse. And I'd love to hear more from any of you who would like to kind of expand on what he's saying there. We have some treatment providers in the audience today. One of the ways I build this event to them was, come and hear from some people in recovery who have something to say about our treatment providers who are looking for more innovative ways, to help people who are entering treatment, who are in recovery. We've got CBT, we've got MAT, we've got the traditional 12-step approaches. We've got all this stuff. I'm wondering if you all could speak more to what innovations might treatment providers bring to help people like yourself who are seeking recovery from substance use disorder.
That's a really great question. As somebody who is a coach, I mean, that's where I make a significant amount of my revenue. I'm all with Jesse on wanting to see more of it. I am in favor of insurance companies supporting it. And I am also hesitant that a recovery coach is enough to get somebody sober in a lot of cases. Right. I often feel like my work, if I deal with people in recovery, is and maybe this is part of what a good recovery coach does, right? Is to help them find what additional resources are available and out there to build the support and community that they need, And so I think that what we are seeing, at least I'm seeing a lot more of in the last few years, is a lot more. I think as Taryn alluded to, as Jess alluded to, more holistic approaches to recovery. I got sober in Central Ohio in, like I said, in the mid 90s, and AA was the only game in town. That was it, and it saved my life. I have a deep sense of gratitude for that. But I'm really happy to see a lot of other approaches. And I think that I think one of the things that's been really good about the pandemic is that I think it has enabled people to connect with more resources online in ways. So, for example, there are some great programs out there. I mean, She Recovers is a great example, but there's like Dharma Recovery, there's Smart Recovery, there's all sorts of different things that if you didn't live in a major metropolitan center, you didn't have a lot of access to before now. And now you do. You have access to all those sort of things. So I think that there's a lot of value in those. The other innovation that I think is interesting, and I have some skepticism about, I have some fear about, and I also have some hope about, is artificial intelligence for helping people deal with emotional issues. There's this really interesting, there's a couple of them out there, but there's one that's called Woebot, 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 which I think is funny. It's this online app. It's instead of robot, it's Woebot, but it's this AI that you can basically type to like you were talking to a therapist. The thing is remarkable. So I don't think it's a replacement, but what we do know is that mental health resources are in short supply. Partially it's people can't afford them, but even when you can afford them, there's not enough of it. And so if we are going to continue to see an escalation of mental health and addiction issues, we can't push enough therapists and counselors through the system right now. So we've got to find other ways of doing this. And I think a lot of the group work that's happening, I think some of these other things, I just think there's a lot out there. Now, again, I have a lot of concern and fear about an AI approach. I'm not saying it's a replacement, but I think it can be potentially an augmentation. I've seen some really interesting things technology wise there that I think are helpful. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Access to treatment. I could just say that 5 times in a row, probably. And that is not only something that's the most important thing, but it's also answers the question of something that I'm most excited about, especially in Ohio. Ohio is one of the very few states, and I work, in this capacity in almost every state, where if you desire help with substance use disorder, in Ohio, you can get it. Right. And a lot of that has to do with our managed care providers and Medicaid and how that works, and presumptive Medicaid. Right. But to kind of expand on what Jesse was talking about, like peer support, I think Ohio is moving towards peer support. And I think what we see and what happens a lot is the model that we have is, there's different levels of care, right? So a person goes into detox and they safely and medically withdraw from whatever substance they're using. And then there's residential, and then they step down to a PHP level of care, and then they may step down to an IOP level of care. And a lot of times an individual will do very well in all of these levels of care. And if you look at their treatment plan, you would say, hey, this person is going to make it, right? They're doing great. They're fulfilling all of their treatment goals. Then they're discharged to where, right? To the same environment, or sometimes worse. There are great sober livings out there, but sometimes they're discharged to a sober living where they don't have access to treatment at that point. And I think that's where peer support is going to come in and really fill that void. And then another thing that, one of the few things that we can thank this pandemic for is we've kind of been forced to utilize teleconferencing and telehealth, right? And I think it's clicked in a lot of providers' minds that, like, why haven't we been doing this all along? Because we're finally in the mindset where it's not all abstinence-based, right? I think we're finally there. And listen, I'm an abstinence-based guy personally, but there are a million different paths to recovery. And all of them can be wildly successful with people. But we have to meet people where we are, right? And that comes down to what is our definition of recovery? And to me, it's somebody whose life is improving. That doesn't mean they have to be completely off of drugs immediately. Doesn't mean they have to be abstinent. Doesn't mean they have to be sticking to whatever their specific MAT protocol is. We have to meet these folks where they're at. Peer support helps do that. Telehealth is going to really help do that, because there are a lot of people that they don't even have the ability to come into a detox, right? They may have, an environment where they have kids and they don't have childcare and they can't leave. Why in 2021 are we not taking them the tablets needed to start engaging them in treatment via telehealth? And I know there are people actually in this audience right now that are doing just that are finding ways to get out in the community and to take the treatment to the people, as opposed to bringing the people to the treatment. And that's what I'm excited
about. Peer support and sober coaches, transitional houses, I think we need more of. Detox centers, we need more of. Programming, I think, is huge, and it needs to be even bigger, because like he said, that if we're sending them back to the street corner and the only thing they know how to do is sell dope on the street corner, then what are we really teaching them? What are we really helping them with? So I think programming to where they can learn a trade, a skill, or something like that, I think that's what we need to implement more and more in the recovery field.
Awesome. Thank you all for those responses. So we've surpassed our hour mark here, and we get a few questions I see from some of our attendees. Looking over the questions with some upvotes from other people in the audience. And let's see here. I'm seeing one from Sally Schisler. Sally, if you would like to come on stage and ask your question, Derek can bring you on, or I can ask it for you. If you're willing to come on, Derek, let's go ahead and bring Sally up and let her ask her question.
Whoops.
Oops. We got Gina instead. Okay, Gina, go.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for what you're sharing today. My question is, do you think the journey of learning to live sober includes skills building that helped you build your own business? And what skills would you say are transferable from recovery, learning to live sober and building your own business? Thank you so much.
I'll start with that. Yeah, I think so. And one of the I would say one of the concepts that was most foundational to my recovery, which has also been most foundational to my ability to build my own business, is a phrase I used to hear in 12-step meetings all the time, which was, sometimes you can't think your way into right action, you have to act your way into right thinking. And that for me was something that I took to heart, because it told me early on with recovery, like, you can't just sit around and think about this stuff. You can't wait until you feel like doing it. You just got to go do it. And my experience with entrepreneurship has been just the same. Yes, it's not like you go off without thinking at all about what you're doing. But, an entrepreneurial cliche is, it's not, ready, aim, fire, right? It's ready, fire, aim, right? You've got to get out there and try things as an entrepreneur. And the worst entrepreneurial mistakes I've made have been ones where I sat around and thought about what I thought everybody wanted for too long, versus actually getting out there and trying to give people something and learning very quickly, oh, wait, that didn't work. So for me, that one phrase, you can't think your way into right action. Sometimes you have to think, or you have to act your way into right thinking, has been foundational for my recovery and everything I've ever done entrepreneurship wise.
For me, it was, like Eric's saying, he had a phrase that kind of helped me along the way. And a lot of guys that I mentor, they hate hearing it, but change the way you think, change the way you live has completely changed my whole aspect on life. And I live by that on the daily. And I know that that's what helps keeps me moving forward and knowing my worth.
I'm just going to say something quickly. Jake said it earlier. It's the who, not the how. When I was in early recovery, I surrounded myself with mentors and sponsors that I looked up to that had what I wanted. It's the same thing in entrepreneurship. I look for people that have what I want, and I ask and reach out for them to help mentor me. So it's the connection thing. The opposite of addiction is connection. It's the same thing in entrepreneurship. It's the who. Who can I look up to? Who can help me, mentor me? Especially in the field that I want to get into. If I want to become a recovery coach, go and reach out to recovery coaches who have successful businesses. So it's kind of the same concept for me. My first sponsor, Andrew, I looked up to him because there was something in his eyes that I saw that I wanted. And I just translate that right into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I love this question, Gina, and I would absolutely say yes. For me, the skills that I have been able to apply to my business that I have gained through recovery have been, I think, resiliency, because it's not, the easiest path. So resiliency for sure, as well as, like, I think it was Jesse talking about earlier, this ability to have fears, but dance with them and learn to kind of walk with them and to kind of learn to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think what comes with that as well is presence and the ability to be present with whatever is, which I think is a huge skill. And I think a really beautiful asset to anybody in business or in life in general. I think being clear and being present is just really important. And I've learned that from my recovery.
Gina, it's a great question. And the answer is yes. The answer is absolutely. I could probably go on for an hour about all of the skills that being in recovery which ones have translated over. But the main parallel that I would touch on is the recovery process is not easy, right? It is very uncomfortable, and it is in the beginning, it's scary, right? And so as you kind of go through that process and you do something that you know is not comfortable, that is new, that is going to change everything about you. And then as you start getting through it, you realize how good of a decision that was that you made, right? When you start seeing the results, and it is very similar to what we're talking about, right? A lot of people, I mean, that's one of the scariest things about starting a business. You're, walking away from maybe a salary or even an hourly position and doing something very uncomfortable, like, putting yourself out there and starting a business. A lot of people who could 100% have wildly successful businesses and probably even had the ideas and concepts didn't do it because of that, because it's so uncomfortable and it's so scary. But having been through that process before and knowing what that payoff was, I just did it. I just jumped into it, right? Because at the end of the day, like, what's the worst that could happen? I fail, and then I go back to working whatever, an hourly job, a salary job, and I pick myself up. I learn from the experience. I go back to the drawing board. Maybe I try it again. And those are like, they're pretty general concepts, but where I really learned those was in the process of recovery.
Something I want to add super quickly, I love that, Jake, is, recovery really taught me how to get out of my own way. And I learned that apparently I'm not the center of the universe like I thought I was. And how that helps me in my business is I'm able to get out of my own way and look back and see the bigger picture and realize it's not about me, right? There's this bigger mission and there's a bigger purpose. And when I can remember to get out of my way, I can stay aligned with that and help more people.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gina, for the question. We've got another one here from Sally. Sally's not going to come on stage. I'm going to go ahead and read her question for her. And again, you all respond as you will, okay? Sally says, working with the traditional systems makes it very hard for excited entrepreneurs who are in recovery to get off the ground. What are your suggestions for mentoring, or what people who face these obstacles should consider? And I'll add to that. Sally is a local friend of mine, and the opportunities for people in recovery in our area down here in Southern Ohio are very limited in very many ways. Traditionally, there are not a lot of living wage jobs. There are not a lot of economic opportunities. So working within the traditional system, she says, makes it hard for excited entrepreneurs to get off the ground. What do you have to offer to them in the way of like mentorship or advice?
I can just share my experience, which is I had no intention to become an entrepreneur in recovery. Let me just tell you that. When I got into recovery, I was like, I'm just grateful to be in recovery, not going to jail, and I'm back in school. That's a miracle. Like, that's it. But in time, I started to surround myself with people as I started to heal more of myself and trauma that were entrepreneurs, and they were paying their bills every month on their own. And I was like, how are they doing it? I've been through so much. I bet if I've made $1 million for Verizon, not saying that I did, maybe, but I bet I could make enough to just pay my bills on my own. And just like Jay said, if I fail, what do I got to lose? I go back to a job. And so I just started to have a different mindset about this. And I think as far as mentorship goes, how I've approached mentors is I will not ask someone to mentor me unless I've added value to them. So I buy their course, I do something that they're doing to add value to them first, then I approach and ask. So that's just my approach. And I mean mentors that I don't know. If I might know this person somehow, you might get away with like just an introduction or a warm introduction. But if I don't know that, how many times I've been turned down? How many people I've reached out to be asked for mentorship and they've never responded? Too many to count. But there's many, many that you can add value to, and they will. Mentors love helping people. It's just find a way to add value to.
Okay, awesome. If there's nothing else to add to that one, we've got a couple questions here from.
I can add something briefly. I think that it depends what we mean by the traditional systems are difficult, but I think entrepreneurship is always a difficult animal. it's hard. And so I think part of being an entrepreneur is just being as creative as possible on what are other ways to accomplish what I want to accomplish, or what are other places I can find help, and there is a lot of free information out there for entrepreneurs. There is a lot of it. There's a lot of entrepreneurial support groups. There's a lot out there. And so it really is sometimes, even before launching the idea, it takes okay, let me just commit myself to a period of time where I learn what I can learn, and let me find how do I gather the resources that I need. But I also have found that entrepreneurs, by and large, love other entrepreneurs. Those people who are successful have a tendency to want to help other people who are trying in the first place. And so again, I like what Jesse said a lot about asking people for help and realizing yeah, you might get 9 no's for every one that says yes, but that will just prepare you for the rest of the entrepreneurial journey, where you'll get 9 no's again all the time for every yes you get. That's, to be an entrepreneur, I think, to a large extent, you have to have an ability to build it's okay that I get a lot of no's. I get a lot of this didn't work. I got a lot of I ran into a brick wall and I pivoted and went a different direction. So, but I do believe there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of people willing to help. We just may need to get creative and courageous in how we ask for it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna expand on that a little bit more too, as somebody who is not a fan of traditional systems, any traditional systems, right? And that is probably the traditional way to start a business would probably be to put it on paper, which you should probably still do, and have a pro forma and have a profit and losses statement, and maybe go secure financing through a bank or any kind of investment firm. But that's not the only way to start a business, right? Especially in 2021. Right, if you want to start a smoothie stand, then you want to network with people who have started smoothie stands, and you'd be shocked at you could probably crowdsource your business idea. There are so many ways to start a business that aren't traditional, and a lot of it goes back to the same thing that we've been talking about all night: putting yourself out there. Hey, not just I want to start a smoothie stand, but hey, I'm a person in recovery, and this is my story, and these were my struggles, and this is what I've overcame, and what I really want to do is open a smoothie stand. Is there anyone out there in recovery? Or is there anyone out there who's been affected by this epidemic, who's a big smoothie stand aficionado? Reach out to me, right? And with the internet, it's crazy. You would really be surprised about who you can meet and how you can get these businesses off the ground. So my short answer to that is forget the traditional systems, right? If you hit a brick wall in the traditional systems, you don't need them. You don't need them.
Yeah, and I'll riff off of what has been already said, especially I think Jesse, you all said a really great points. But for me, it was really just finding those people who were doing the work that I was called to do, and just trying to make sure I could be in their energy as much as possible in any different types of capacity. And also just really making sure that I wasn't trying to copy what they were doing. I did do that in the beginning, pardon me. I thought that I needed to be like these people and do it exactly how they did it, and I was getting nowhere. And I actually spent a lot of energy on that. So for me, it was, okay, I'm going to be in these people's energy. I like what they're doing, but how can I put my spin on it? How can I make it unique to me? And this is a really possibly annoying answer, but it's trust your intuition, trust that and trust your inner guidance system. And that comes with recovery as well, right? Is this ability to trust ourselves and to take risks and to, take the jump and do it. But find the mentors, be in their energy, but also don't compare and don't try to copy. Just bring your uniqueness to everything that you're wanting to offer.
Awesome. Thank you all for those responses. So we've got a couple questions from Sean Boyd. Sean is maybe having connection problems to come online, so I'm going to go ahead and ask one of them. I know Sean. He's a local guy down here in Southern Ohio, and like John, he is focused a lot on helping people in early recovery, so people getting into treatment. And the big problem down here in our rural area is transportation and transitional living. So Sean's question is in regards to that. If any of you have experience to speak on this, feel free to do so. He mentions the need for transitional living for people who are just now saying they need help, trying to get into treatment. What can we do for people who are completing treatment or trying to enter treatment who have no sober living or transitional living for them to go to? And those people often end up going right back to where they came from, which then they end up going back to their addiction. Any of you all, if you'd like to speak to that, feel free.
Well, I'll just say right off the bat that we don't have enough of it. I mean, that's one of the things we need to change. We need more entrepreneurs showing up and opening more transitional living homes. We need more sober living residences. And that's where and my friends are in the space here in New Hampshire. And I can tell you, it is not easy. But at the same time, we just need more of it, right? We need more people. And I think that's why this discussion tonight about entrepreneurship and recovery is so important, that someone hears this recording, a message, who is a VC, who is a venture capitalist, and says, hey, look at Jake's already doing this. Let's just give Jake money and expand that. Let's give money. We're already doing it. We've been doing it for years. We're ready. We want to change lives. We've lost too many friends. So we want more of these communities, these sober living residences. We want ecosystems of recovery. I want to see hotels created for recovery. And that is actually happening right now, but it takes 2 years for that to happen. So these are the things I want to start to see, is just more.
And I missed, somebody complimented me, and I think halfway in the chat, so I missed the whole question because I was obsessed with what it was. Was it lack of transitional living? Yeah. So, and yeah, that's a huge problem everywhere. But there's a huge silver lining in that problem, and there's a very easy solution. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but the reason that we lack transitional living environments is because, the go-to folk who would provide those transitional living opportunities, there's not a huge profit margin in it, right? When they compare that against detox, residential, even an outpatient PHP, IOP level of care, once you get to transitional living, the profit margin, they fall off, right? So anyone, a lot of these facilities that are providing transitional living are really doing it just almost as a public service. They're not making a lot of money off of it in that capacity as a big company, right? But the silver lining of that is, when done as like a small business owner, which this is such a good small business for somebody, and John can probably speak on this as somebody who has real estate knowledge. If somebody wants to open a small business that revolves around recovery, that they're going to be hands-on with and make a decent income, starting a small transitional living is that. It's that opportunity. And if we start having, entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs step up and say, hey, well, maybe I can't come in and do a 300-bed transitional living, but I could make a damn good 8-bed transitional living, right? And once those entrepreneurs start doing that and start seeing that, listen, are they going to become millionaires in 1 year? No. But are they going to make a good living while they're giving back to the community? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what we need to see. And there are people doing it. But like everything that we've talked about tonight, we need their stories to go out there. We need one of them in a forum like this saying, hey, that's what I did. I bought a little house for 80 grand. I did some renovations to it. It's got 4 bedrooms. I've got 8 guys in there. Here are the rules. They've got to be in some kind of course of recovery, course of action. They have to have a job, right? They have to do these things. And, they pay this rent. It's very reasonable. It's cheaper than them getting an apartment. And they have an environment where there's accountability, right? Where there is support. There's peer support that's coming in. They have each other to lean on. And I've made a decent living off doing it. And when we start seeing those success stories, we're going to start seeing more of those pop up. And that's what's going to solve this problem.
I think that, a lot of these communities have these houses that are, either property taxes or that are owed on them, and they're just sitting. And the house that we're opening up is going to be 4 beds, but it's going to be, it's 4 more people. And I think that if we can not only right here in Scioto County start, speaking out and giving people the idea to open up their own transitional or whatever, it's, the more bed availability, the better this whole epidemic gets.
Awesome. So I think we got time here for one more question before we head to the tables for our final kind of breakout session and just talk as we wind up our evening. And this one is a little bit more on, I guess, the personal side, away from entrepreneurship. But I'm really interested to hear what you all have to say about this. This question is coming from Ruby Storms, and she says, I'm a mother of an addict, and I have realized that I was and am an enabler. When I changed my ways with how to deal with my addiction, my son, who is now 31 years old, he is no longer speaking to me and hasn't for over a year. What can I do to try to reconnect with him?
That's a tough situation. I always say that I couldn't imagine one of my kids coming to me and telling me that they're an addict, or finding out that one of my kids are an addict. So I can only imagine what I put my mother and father through. But and tough love is, it's easy to say, but it's hard to do whenever it's a loved one within the family or something like that. But letting them know that you're there, I believe, is huge. But one of the things we say in our live all the time is that we got to realize that sometimes we enable too much, and at least burying our son, daughter, whatever. But I think just letting them know that when they're ready, you're there, and that that love's still strong, and and hopes that they find their way. One of the hardest things that we go through is, we want recovery more than a lot of people that reach out to us. And that's just not the way it works. It sucks.
Yeah, and to expand on that a little bit, we've that was a really popular school of thought for a long time, right? Matter of fact, like what a lot of people consider the birth of any kind of recovery movement was very centered on tough love, on hitting bottoms, right? So we kind of accepted that as the gospel for a very, very long time. And the fact of the matter is, there are certain, without getting into different substances, there are certain situations where that may work, right? But the problem is in 2021, it's not a lot of people that are just, especially younger people, they're not just putting whiskey in their milk anymore, right? They're doing drugs that are cut with fentanyl. And a lot of times they're deprived of that bottom, right? They're deprived of those consequences. They don't even get to see them because, they don't make it that long. So I'm a big proponent of kind of changing the way that we view that. Now enabling still certainly is a thing, right? You're probably not going to want to be in a position where he's calling you, hey, I need $100. Okay, let me Venmo you $100. Mom, pay my rent. No, negative, right? Especially if it's someone in active addiction. But engaging with him, having conversations that have nothing to do with his addiction, right? Not even bringing it up is probably the best way to start building that relationship back, and letting him know that, like, hey, us just talking about what you're going through and what you're doing in life and how you're feeling, it's not contingent upon you not doing drugs, right? I just want to do this because I love you and I'm here for you. And when you start to build that small connection back, it may not be overnight, but he can get to that point where he's like, hey, my mom's talking to me again. My mom's interested in me being a part of her life. The community's talking to me again. I'm starting to feel connected. You know what? Maybe I don't want to shoot dope anymore. Maybe I want that life. Maybe I want to improve on that connection. So that's where I would start. I would just reach out and just don't even have a conversation about his drug use or his just, hey, how are you? What's going on? What's going on in life? What do you think about, how's the pandemic affecting you? What do you think about this GameStop, stock situation that happened a few weeks ago? Anything, right? Just to make him realize, like, hey, I'm a human being. And I don't have to just talk to my mom about, like, me being a drug addict.
That's so beautiful, Jake. I love everything that you said, and you too, John. And I think I'll just speak from experience for me. When I was 16 and I was addicted, my mom, she was a part of a 12-step program. So she was going to her community for support, and her community was telling her kind of that tough love mentality of you have to let her hit rock bottom. But my mom really, she had kind of her motherly intuition. She knew, well, rock bottom for a 16-year-old addicted to meth is probably death. So that just wasn't an option for her, right? She wasn't going to let me hit my bottom. With that said, she wasn't enabling me, right? Like there was tough love, but she had her boundaries, but she was honoring herself. But what really did work for me is exactly what Jake was talking about. I was having my own experience. I was doing my own journey, and that was the end of it. But the whole time I was not at home engaging what I was engaging in, I always knew that my mom and my home was a safe place to land. I always knew that when I was ready, if I was ready, that I could go home and that I was going to be okay, that I was going to have consequences, right? Like I was going to have to deal with a lot of shit when I got home, but I knew that I wasn't going to be shamed. I wasn't going to be judged. I knew that I was going to be going home to unconditional love. And when I was having, a moment when I decided to go back home, it was that knowing that, I already had so much shame. I didn't need more, but I knew I could go home. And yeah, I don't know if that helps, but just, that's my personal experience of being on the other side.
Yeah, I agree with what you both have said. I think that this consequences and rock bottom is an incomplete version of recovery. I think that it takes some amount of consequences combined with enough hope. Those two things have to come together. That's the fertile environment that recovery can spring from. I think the other thing, if any of us who deal with this long enough are really honest, the reality is none of us knows what the heck is going to get some people sober versus other people. We just don't know what works. We know what works in certain cases, but for some people, it's like, yeah, my mom kicked me out and I had to live on the streets, and that's what got me sober. And somebody else will say, my mom loved me to death and made me hot chocolate every day, and that's why I got sober. We don't know. We can't predict. So I think that while we think about what's good, what the best thing we can think of for the addict, and we need to do that, the thing that I turn to most with people who are family members is, how can you stay sane and healthy through this? Because we do know that being really close with people who are addicts will make us sick. It will drive us crazy. It will destroy us. And so, yes, we need to think about what's the right thing to do for the addict, but we've really also got to really be thinking about what's the right thing to do for ourselves so that we can get through this, because we don't know what's going to work for the addict. So, but we can know what we need.
I'm just going to add real quick because I know we're coming up on time here, but I love what everyone is saying. And I just want to, Gabor Mate says, don't ask what's wrong with you, ask what happened to you. And this is a really important thing, that we start to bring in this idea of compassion and empathy. Because I can tell you right now, the addict is going through hell, a hell that is indescribable. And the world is already such a harsh, harsh place. It's such a harsh place that to just bring in more shame and more of the stigma that we're already facing doesn't help anything. So I really, to be honest, I flip it on the person and say self-care for yourself, self-regulation for yourself, be the change you want to see. And like Taryn said, be that safe place. Be that safe place. I knew I could always come back. I could come back, and that saved my life. A lot of people don't have that. But I knew, like, hey, if shit had really hits the fan, which it did, I came back and I had that support. And so I really do believe it is this whole thing about you have to hit a bottom. Just like Jake said, the bottom now is death. So there's no bottom anymore. Your bottom could be, I'm just, enough is enough today. I'm ready to change. Can you help me? And having that place that they can feel psychological safety with is, to me, that's really the change we need to see now.
Josh, I want to, this has turned into something that to me is that important. I want to say one more thing about it too. We put a lot of our advocacy efforts, almost all of them, into people who are in recovery, right? Or people who are in early recovery, or people who are in active addiction, but, want to be in recovery. And we almost put zero advocacy on people who are using drugs right now, actively, with no desire to stop. Right? And that's where a lot of our advocacy has to be, with those people. I did a lot of work with a harm reduction organization called the Indiana Recovery Alliance, and it changed the way that I viewed everything, because the only people who volunteered at the IRA were people who were actively using drugs and they didn't want to stop. Right? They were injecting crystal meth and heroin before they came in to volunteer, in the parking lot sometimes. And they still came in, and they made Narcan kits for people, right? And they made different harm reduction kits for people. And the whole kind of vibe was, we don't care that you're using drugs. Like, you're a member of this community and we want you here and we need you. And we need you to help other community members. And just them feeling like they were a part of something and it wasn't contingent upon them wanting to be sober started changing things for a lot of people there. And they made the decision not like, hey, I better get sober because Josh supporting me is contingent upon me acting like I want to get sober. But it's like, damn, I feel connected and I feel like loved and supported right now while I'm high. And like that started changing things. So, if you take anything from what we're saying when we get off this, don't limit like your compassion to people who are trying to get sober. Like the guy that's on the street corner holding a sign who's gonna for sure probably go drink or use, that's where the advocacy efforts are needed.
Fantastic. Love it, Jake. Thank you so much, all of you. We're at 7:22 now. We've got David on the stage with us. David's going to maybe ask a question, maybe transition us over to our breakout sessions. And again, once we get back to the tables, you're all free to hang out, answer questions, follow up on this conversation as much as you want. David, take it away.
Yeah, I probably was going to ask a question, but I like to let people know what the timing is and then stick to it. So I will just have some closing comments here. I've talked with a lot of people the past few years in recovery that are starting businesses, whether it's something like lawn care, landscaping, whether it's a barbershop, whether it's a skate shop, whether it's t-shirt printing, whether it's food meal prep, right? Whatever. But the point being is, and Jesse, you kind of alluded to this earlier. I know a lot of, I've talked with almost all of you individually about your stories, and there's obstacles along the way, and it's okay to face those obstacles and then keep going. I've had conversations about, I saw somebody posted a question about how difficult it is to get to do job placements, work placements, especially if you have a felony, and how for some people maybe starting your own thing is almost a way around that. People kind of find some creativity in the presence of obstacles. So I am, one of my questions was about, obstacles and how you all kind of overcame those. But frankly, I think that we're just going to transition to the tables here. And if you could all, take a couple minutes and stick around just in case somebody didn't get an opportunity to ask a question. We're going to go to that lounge area with the tables. And for you all in the audience, make sure you click on a seat at the table if you'd like, and that will bring you to a small group window with everyone else at that table. And then it'll prompt you to turn your mic and camera on if you'd like and have that conversation. So with that, I want to thank all of our panelists for kind of being up here in front of us all virtually. Thank you for your time and your thoughts and your stories. And we'll transition here back to the lounge.